I think that all of us have these very deep feelings of tenderness and sadness.
If you don't discuss it, just eats away at you.
I never talked about it with anybody.
The greater damage done to me was keeping the secret.
If I can be vulnerable, that'll help other people be vulnerable. And it doesn't work for me to be silent. It makes me sick, literally, physically.
I can't believe I'm going to tell you this story, but I'm going to tell you the story.
If I could have known that you and I were alike, I would have had so much more hope.
You realize you are not the only one.
I think you can feel so supported just by knowing that you're not alone.
From WMPG, I'm Dr. Anne Hallward, a psychiatrist in Portland, Maine, and this is Safe Space Radio, the show about the subjects we would struggle with less if we talked about them more.
Hello everyone, my name is Layne Gregory, and I am privileged to be able to say that I have been involved with Safe Space Radio from the very beginning, pretty much, and in a variety of ways. Anne has invited me to be a guest on the show 3 times. She invited me to be on the board from the very beginning, and I also was part of a support group that met regularly to help Anne brainstorm ways in which the programs could expand and become more meaningful in terms of accessing and proliferating the community impact. This has been a program that I joyfully participated in, not just because Anne is amazing and she has an incredible way of bringing amazing people together, but because this is such an extraordinarily unique and meaningful program. There was nobody else doing mental health on the radio, and there was certainly no one else who'd been able to frame so thoughtfully that shame and stigma are public health issues, and that we could all benefit from talking about them more and talking together and listening to one another. This has been a wild ride in so many ways, and I'm so glad that the programs will live on in such a vital and real way. I have loved every minute that I've been part of Safe Space Radio. And as I've told Anne, once you're part of Safe Space Radio, you're always part of Safe Space Radio. So thank you, Anne, for all these opportunities to work with you, to meet amazing people, and to delve into issues that are so important to all of us. I love you.
Maya Angelou once said, "People will forget what you said, they will forget what you did, but they will not forget how you made them feel." As a child who grew up being abused physically, sexually, and emotionally by a parent who was a sex addict, I perpetually felt unsafe, terrorized, and threatened. During my young adult life, I've tried to find safe places to live and safe people to befriend. Eating disorders and suicidal ideations plagued me, along with paranoia and debilitating anxieties. And when I found Safe Space Radio, I was drawn in immediately. This show was daring to uncover the deepest, darkest secrets held by many of us who dared not share our shame stories. Dr. Anne Hallward interviewed me several times in the earlier days of Safe Space Radio about my eating disorders and other struggles. It was one of the first times I could tell my story, and here I was telling it on live radio. And being interviewed by Dr. Anne Hallward, I felt safe immediately. She made me feel like my shame was actually being honored and lifted up and cared for. Her extraordinary empathy and deep compassion offered an unconditional, loving presence for my shame. Safe Space Radio taught me that I could do that for myself and do that for others. Thank you, Safe Space Radio.
Listening to Safe Space Radio has impacted me in so many ways. When I listen, for example, for this show where Anne is speaking with a woman, a asylum seeker from Burundi, it reminded me a lot of the time I was working with women survivors of the most extreme forms of rape in the east of the Congo, my home region, in a community where there wasn't even a word for rape in the local languages. So many shows like that, when Anne interacts with her guests, hearing the sounds of their voice and the sight before they tell their story just brought back those memories and reminded me of the relief, the sense of freedom, and even the smile that I will see on the face of those women after they will finally felt safe to share their story, usually after having kept it and lived with the shame and the guilt for so long. Also, as a parent, I learned a lot from Safe Space Radio, like the show talking about how to speak about sexuality to your children, where Layne Gregory gave the tool, the example of way we can speak about such difficult topics to our kids. Now I have kids in puberty. Sometimes I go back to that show, listen to it over and over again, because as a mom, it's hard to talk about these things. These are real life struggles, and Safe Space Radio has greatly contributed to overcome them. So thank you so much, Anne Hallward, for the amazing work you did with Safe Space Radio.
Hello, my name is Esther Anne, and I am on the board of Wabanaki Reach. I was interested in being on the show because I was really committed to sharing the story of truth, healing, change here in the Dawnland, Wabanaki, also known as Maine. I was truly inspired to share when Anne honored Wabanaki ways of knowing and being by allowing my Wabanaki sisters, Stephanie and Maria, to join me on the show. We were able to have a conversation and connect with each other and support each other through the interview. When I think of impact of Safe Space Radio, I can't help but remember a story a Native man told me. He said that he heard the show while he was incarcerated in one of the prisons here in Maine. And he said listening to it gave him a sense of pride and hope and connection.
The Maine Wabanaki State Child Welfare Truth and Reconciliation Commission was the focus of more Safe Space Radio shows than any other topic areas. I think a total of 15 episodes. Naturally, these were my favorite programs as they align with a passion of mine. Through Anne's early recognition of the importance of the issues being explored through the Maine Wabanaki TRC process, a spotlight was shown on the many brave people behind the scenes who made that work happen. Thanks to Anne, the voices of the original convening group, eventually the group that became Wabanaki Reach, the voices of commissioners, the voices of community organizers, the voices of Native and non-Native child welfare workers, and the voices of allies and supporters, both Native and non-Native, were given a public platform to talk about the impact on Native children being taken from their homes and their families, and the resulting harms of physical and emotional abuse, as well as the cultural loss they endured. Those shows helped raise public awareness and understanding and support of the TRC and what it was about. These stories, these statements, now archived at the Harvard Medical School, are an important addition to the official TRC statements that are housed in the archives at Bowdoin College. Thank you, thank you, thank you to Anne, to the board, and to the staff.
My name is Phil Walsh, and I've had the great joy to be engaged with Safe Space Radio for the past 8 years or so in a variety of volunteer roles. Also, in 2020, I had the distinct honor and privilege to be featured as a guest on a show called From Violence to Voice. It was a profound experience for me, one that gave me a new appreciation for the transformative power of compassion. The process of being interviewed by Anne, of being supported by her through that process, and having my own thoughts and wisdom reflected back to me was a gift. It was a healing moment for me, allowing me to see and hold my younger self with love, care, and compassion. It felt almost like time travel, creating a portal that permitted me to sit with my younger self and give him the support and encouragement that he needed in that time. I can almost allow myself to think that that is actually what happened. Either way, it was magic. From the complexity and confusion of a complicated experience, we were able, through courageous conversation, to bring a resolution of grace, wisdom, love, and care. Sounds like a miracle to me. Thank you, Anne, and thank you, Safe Space Radio.
Having the opportunity to share my story on Safe Space Radio over a decade ago was the true inspiration to go public with my story of generations of mental illness within my family. Prior to that, I was attending support groups, and in those support groups and the privacy of those support groups, talking quietly about mental illness. And then the opportunity came in 2012, 6 years into my daughter's diagnosis with bipolar disorder, that I thought to myself, I have to go public with this story. I've got to share it with others. It's got to be on the radio in any forum possible in order to break the silence and shame and stigma around mental illness and all the issues that are affecting actually all of us. And so here we are, 2023, years have passed, and my daughter is in recovery, quite a journey that she's had. She has written a book of poetry about her experiences with bipolar disorder. And I am just so grateful to have had this opportunity to share my story. I'm sharing with you a letter that my daughter wrote to me after she heard my interview on Safe Space Radio. And I'll try to read it as if she was reading it. Hi, Mama. Finally got the chance to listen to your show tonight, and wow, I hardly know what to say first. I know that I have this feeling deep in my chest rising for my throat. It feels like healing and like gratitude. I'm so honestly surprised at how healing it was for me to listen to you so respectfully, gracefully, and wisely speak about your life and these experiences. Healing of all things, to see you and ultimately us, you and me and our family from afar, as just a dot in the constellation of mental illness and struggle in the expanse of silent sky. You are speaking for so many. We are shining for so many. I wish I'd been able to hear something like this as a high schooler or even in college from the mouths of those who lived it. Every bone in my body is grateful you did this. Thank you for how respectful you were. Your honesty shimmered. Your strength moved me. Is there any way I can get a hard copy of the interview? I want to always have it. Also, you sang on the radio. How cool was that? It was so beautiful. I'm so glad she played it. I would love to talk more about it voice to voice. I just had to send you a note right after listening. What a gift. Thank you, Mom. Here's to the journey. I love you.
Hello, this is Glenn Close. I'm leaning on my comforting dog pillow, and I'm here to congratulate and to honor Anne Hallward and Safe Space Radio. I met Anne on the beach in Maine quite a number of years ago, and we immediately bonded over our passion to make the world better for people suffering with mental illness. And I have been impressed over the years of her resilience, her passion, and the incredible number of interviews she has done on Safe Space Radio, in which she interviews people and gives them the chance to tell their stories that will help people who are struggling on the margins, in the dark, full of shame, frightened about the fact that they're dealing with a mental illness, coming from a family that has mental illness in it, bipolar disorder, dying by suicide, serious depression, schizophrenia. I know firsthand how incredibly important it is to feel safe, to know that you are in a space where you are understood and your story can be told. And you will find compassion, and you will find wisdom, and you will find inspiration. All that is what Anne Hallward has achieved in her phenomenal collection of interviews in Safe Space Radio, which is now, thankfully, housed at Harvard. So congratulations, Anne. You have done a magnificent service to all of us, and congratulations, to myself included, to all of us who participated, and may the world be better for it. I'm sure it is. Cheers. Bye.
My story was about my son Brendan, who died of an opiate overdose shortly before his 23rd birthday. My hope in sharing his story was to convey that people who struggle with opiate addiction are real, worthwhile human beings who shouldn't be reduced to negative labels. I wanted to talk about Brendan and to counter the stigma by showing that he was a kind, sensitive, creative, fun person who was loved by his family, and that addiction is a life and death struggle that's born out of an attempt to deal with emotional pain. I also wanted to be a voice for those families who had lost a loved one but felt silenced by stigma. While we were talking, the question came up of if I had learned anything from Brendan, and the answer that came to me was that I had learned the depth of my love, and that was a moment of healing for me. I've had a deep commitment to making something worthwhile out of the tragedy of his death, and knowing that I've honored him and shared his story and helped others in the process, and that will go on for years to come, offers me some solace to my grief. And I'm very grateful to Anne and to Safe Space Radio for that.
I'm David Moltz. I'm a psychiatrist and a founding board member of Safe Space Radio. About 12 years ago, when I was just getting to know Anne, she interviewed me on her half-hour college radio station interview program. The topic was something like, what does it mean to be a psychiatrist? At the end of that half hour, I felt seen and heard and understood in a really remarkable way. And even more remarkable, Anne, by her presence and by her questions, brought out the best version of myself. I was really proud to send the link to that program to friends and to family with a note saying, this is what I do. Now you can see what I do. Over the years, as I've worked more closely with Anne and collaborated with her, I've seen her do this in many, many settings, with participants in her program, with board members, with staff, with donors. It's a remarkable gift, and it's a privilege to have been able to watch this and to be a part of it over the years. Now I'm delighted that it's going to be preserved and made accessible through Harvard so that other people can experience this gift. So thank you, Anne, for that and for everything.
I am so delighted to help celebrate Safe Space Radio's 15 years of success. My name is Inga Sandvoss Brown, and I'm a high school teacher in Southern Maine. Safe Space Radio has impacted my teaching and the lives of my students through Dr. Anne Hallward's modeling of courageous storytelling. We've looked at many programs from Safe Space Radio as we've read literature and essays in my classes when Dr. Anne explores topics that are difficult to talk about, such as trauma, anxiety, mental illness, bystander guilt, and racism in our society. I've been able to supplement literature and essays in my classes so that my students hear the authentic stories from real people who are leading the way and telling their stories. I think that empathy and compassion is really the #1 goal in storytelling, and I think that Dr. Anne has done such a wonderful job in leading the way. And she says to her guests, whether directly or indirectly, I see your courage. I love the way I feel when I listen to Safe Space Radio. My own Empathy and compassion are broadened and widened, and I'm a better teacher because of these programs. I'm delighted that these programs will be available through Harvard Medical School's library for generations to come. Congratulations to Dr. Anne Hallward and the entire team at Safe Space Radio. Thank you.
Safe Space Radio changed so much about my life. It gave me an opportunity to talk about things that I hadn't been given an opportunity to talk about before. I really didn't know very many other trans folks where I was, and especially trans folks or trans masculine folks that chose to still be very feminine. And I think at the time that I did my interview with Safe Space Radio, I identified as non-binary, but it was getting to sit down and truly explore those topics and speak to somebody who was willing to really listen to me in what felt like the first time changed a lot for me. And it's made Safe Space Radio and my experience being interviewed on the show a truly incredible and impactful moment in my life and a real turning point in my own understanding of who I am. I have listened back to the radio show a couple of years ago, and definitely things have changed for me, especially since I was interviewed, but it feels incredible to have that time capsule, to have that space there where I can look back and truly see and understand myself. It was just an incredible experience, and I'm so happy that I was included.
Remembering the story that I shared with Safe Space Radio and recalling the way that I interpreted that story when I was 16 and then rehearing that now, I'm going to be 27 soon. I feel incredibly proud of my younger self for having that kind of strength and perspective on such a difficult situation, and I feel deeply honored to have been given the opportunity to share that story with other people who may have needed to hear it. I am incredibly honored that this story will be archived and maintained in history, and that, moving forward, we're in an era of actually being able to record LGBTQ history for the first time, and in future eras moving down the line, there will be young queer people who will be able to access this kind of history in a way that when I was young, I didn't have access to, LGBTQ history books. It was all via the internet or spoken word, older queer people passing that on. So to be a part of the first true generation of LGBT people who are able to maintain their history and repeat it for generations to come, I feel wonderful to have been included in this, and it has been a deep pleasure. Thank you so much to everybody who has been a part of this. And finally, I have to say thank you to the late, the great Betsy Parsons, who has touched so many lives, and I would not be the person that I am today without her. So thank you, Betsy, and thank you, everybody.
Hello, I'm Sarah Lennon. 10 years ago, my best friend Mary Townsend and I met Anne for lunch because she had floored us with her TED Talk. Right then and there, she invited us to be on the board of a not yet formed nonprofit. Obviously, we said yes because no one ever says no to Anne Hallward. And with that, we stepped into a new world of fascinating people, intense conversation, outsized ambitions, and lots of laughter. Anne pulled us into an ever-growing community. What began with a 6-person board grew and grew. Because when Anne meets someone she likes, and that would be everyone she ever meets, they're in her orbit forever. She was constantly making up new committees, subgroups, advisory teams, and spin-offs to make sure that no one got away from her affection. And with each new person, she would say to us, "You guys are going to love this person. I just know it. They are so smart and creative and amazing. I just can't wait till you meet them." I feel so much gratitude to Anne for all of the wonderful people I've met through her, for offering a model of undeterred passion and never ever giving up, no matter how high an obstacle, for honoring pain while spreading laughter and joy, for loving unconditionally and ebulliently. I'm relieved to know that Anne is incapable of stopping or even pausing. So while this gathering may be the close of a chapter, we all know that sometime soon we're going to get that ping on our phone, a text from Anne saying, "Hey, I have an idea I want to discuss with you." And our hearts will soar.
I'm Mike Elgin, and I'm an IFS trainer. And I trained Dr. Anne Hellward. So when she started the radio show, she asked me if I'd be her first guest and talk about shame and addiction, which was a particular interest of mine. And so I did. And then the rest, of course, is history. She interviewed all kinds of people. She has been an incredible gift to the field and the world, and has tried to make fearless communication and courageous communication much more popular, and understand vulnerability as a gift to the world. And has also done some of the very best workshops I've ever seen. And so I'm making this tape to honor Anne Hellward and her contribution to us all.
I wanted to give my tribute to Safe Space Radio by talking about how important it is that your program was on radio for several reasons. One is, of course, that trauma is so shameful for so many people. And so if they're going to talk about it with anybody, it feels much safer, I'm sure, to many people not to have their faces shown, but just to have their voices raised. And you gave people a place to have a voice. And also a safe place, because radios are both more private and more accessible than screens. Many people who don't have a television or might not have a smartphone will have a radio. So I think it is really the most accessible form of media. And also radios are portable. So you can if you have a portable radio, you can take it into a private room, or you can even take it outdoors into a private space, or you can turn it on in your car if you have no privacy at home. So all of those features of radio make it safe for survivors. And also it is really the most accessible way to disseminate information and for consciousness raising, for making people aware that they're not alone. I like to cite the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, which I think one of its many innovations and what made it such a powerful forum for survivors was that it was broadcast live on radio when survivors testified before the Truth Commission. And so people who couldn't read, people who didn't own a television, people could hear throughout the country the testimony of other survivors.
And I think it was really thanks to radio and thanks to disseminating survivors' voices throughout the country. So I do want to honor you for that innovation.
Hello, I'm Susan Bryson. I'm a philosophy professor at Dartmouth who studies trauma and gendered violence, and I'm a survivor of a rape and attempted murder in France 33 years ago. In the immediate aftermath of the assault, one of the most difficult aspects of my recovery was the taboo against talking about what had happened. Over the last 3 decades, more and more survivors of sexual violence have broken that taboo, but it can still be a challenge, even for allies and supporters, to know how to respond. I'm enormously grateful to you, Anne Hallward, and to Safe Space Radio for enabling trauma survivors to break the silence. No one has done more to teach so many how to reduce stigma and shame and how to respond with educated empathy to survivors' stories. Congratulations on 15 years of this extraordinarily successful project. And from the bottom of my heart, thank you.
I was inspired by the trust that I placed in the host, Anne Hallward. She made me feel comfortable sharing my pain, my shame, my vulnerability. And I do hope that my story had helped individuals who are going through hardship to feel less alone. Sharing my story had impacted my life personally because I've learned that from my personal experience that shame loses its power when you talk about it. I'm grateful to Safe Space Radio for providing me this space to be able to tell my story. Thank you.
What inspired me to share my story was a conversation that I had with Anne about apologies and the idea of apologizing to oneself. It was such a healing conversation for me that the idea that it could help others was certainly compelling. But really what it was Anne's enthusiasm for the story, her belief in it, and her deep understanding that gave me the courage to share. And I'm so grateful that I did. I'm grateful to Anne and to Safe Space Radio for being such tender stewards of my story and giving me the opportunity for my story to live beyond my own experience. Thank you.
It was a 7.5-year journey, taking care of mom and dad. Basically flew alone and happened to hear this program on the radio, and I felt normal for the first time. That I wasn't overreacting, that I wasn't underreacting, that my feelings were legitimate, were normal. And that's made all the difference in going forward. It made going forward possible, really.
I was privileged to be invited on the Safe Space Radio a handful of times over the years, covering a number of different subjects. I think the hope is that everybody that had a chance to hear any of those shows was impacted in some sort of positive way. But when I think about my own participation in those shows, the thing that brought me and drew me into wanting to be a part of those was the chance to be a part of the Passion Project for my good friend. And to the extent that a project like this is a labor of love, I hope that the work that friendship can do to create space where courageous and caring conversation can happen in a way that can help those people grow in some way. and feel cared for in a way that helps diminish whatever shame they may have in their lives, then all the better. I would be proud to have contributed to something that had that impact for people. But more than anything, I was just really proud and honored to be a part of this project with my friend.
Hi, my name is Sarah McLaughlin, and I'm a social worker and a parent educator. And because of that, and because I have a background in early childhood education, I have always subscribed to the advice and wisdom of Mr. Rogers. And Mr. Rogers has a quote that goes something to the effect of, "What is mentionable is manageable," meaning that we suffer most when we are in isolation with the things that are difficult for us. So that was really what motivated me to be a guest on Safe Space Radio, which I have been several times. And I feel like it did its job. I feel honored to have been able to share some difficult times that I went through on some difficult topics, and feel just delighted in the knowledge that it has made a difference. So thank you, Anne, and Safe Space Radio.
What invited me to go was you, and the way that you expressed your understanding of shame and the value of telling a story that sort of dissolved any kind of fear of being found out. And so that's my thank you for you creating Safe Space. And what I hoped to do by going on Safe Space was to tell my story, expand my story for myself, and to tell my story to people whose landscape is adoption and reunion. This interview was 25 years after I reunified with my daughter, and the learning that I had, the acceptance that her family had of me, the way that they addressed adoption in their entire family system was totally unknown to me. I guess you could say foreign to me. And so I had sort of a very large change when I met them. I accepted myself and the decision I had made because they loved her and they felt like I had given them a gift. So if that would expand some people's understandings of adoption, then my story was valuable. And I felt like I did give a gift. How I feel now after being on the show and having it be broadcast all over the world for 10 years or so, I no longer have any trouble telling anybody that story. So thank you again for creating Safe Space and for giving it such a sweet ending. Thank you.
One of the things that's really become clear to me is the importance of learning how to use my own story and speaking my own story publicly, the power of that, and helping other people understand how, especially when you're adopted, there are parts of yourself that you may hold back from others. You know, I've in that segment on Safe Space Radio, you heard me talk about how adopted people tend to hold parts of themselves back from their adoptive family, what we call the experience of divided loyalties between their birth families and their adoptive families. And I think it's this experience of holding oneself back and sort of coming to the fear that is involved in that, the anxiety and fear that causes one to hold back, that when you learn to speak publicly and be able to share your story, it takes away the fear, it helps dissolve it. And I think that is a great metaphor really for moving into life and sort of defining yourself, standing up for what you believe, and really trying to help other people find the power to stand up for what they believe as well.
Telling my story on Safe Space allowed me to speak about things that I had only vaguely realized before then were important to me. Somehow, in that very public space of live radio, I felt safe and I felt able to open to the more intimate feelings of grief that I was experiencing as the mother of a child who had recently died. I think maybe it was because I knew that at least one person was really listening and taking really seriously what I was saying. Maybe it was her conviction that my feelings were worthy of sharing with her audience. And I think it could be that that allowed me to see that my story and myself were worthy. And for me, this was a big turning point, or part of a big turning point, to know that sharing my stories could have an impact on others, to see that what I was doing with my grief by turning it into poetry and other kinds of writing could be a model for others. Through speaking on Safe Space Radio, I began to see myself as an ally to other grieving parents and eventually everyone who grieves in some way. So, speaking on the radio was new for me. I'd never done really much public speaking, and I'd certainly done nothing on live media. So I was definitely scared. But by stepping into that fear with the guidance and support that I got, I learned that vulnerability really leads to strength. And I learned that people need to hear each other's stories. And finally, I think I learned that I needed to tell my own story in order to feel a stronger sense of connection with the world.
My name is Mary Ellen Lindemann. I'm one of the founders of Coffee by Design. One of my greatest wishes is that someday when we speak of mental illness, we refer to it in the past tense. But in order to get there, we need to destigmatize it and find our way to mental wellness and well-being. What started years ago in our relationship with Safe Space Radio turned into table tents in our coffee houses, which were launched prior to the pandemic. I do know that people were accessing those QR codes, but I can tell you the significance of them in being low barrier access to information became vitally important as we were allowed to stay open as an essential business and people came in small numbers into our coffee houses. The QR codes became a lifeline, I know, for many, in gathering information either for themselves or others. I am confident that although Safe Space Radio may be closing its doors to new episodes, many windows were opened and will continue to be so through the episodes being housed through libraries and other places where people who, whether they know it or not, need help and information. I look forward to continuing our conversation through episodes and using Safe Space Radio as a resource as we all work towards that day when we all can celebrate mental well-being.
Hi, my name is Austin Greene, and my first experience with Safe Space Radio was when they reached out to me in my role as the director of Art Center programs at the Dream Yard Art Center located in the Bronx, New York. Dream Yard is a social justice and creative arts organization for young people and community, as I mentioned, located in the Bronx. And a few years back, Anne and her team reached out to us because Safe Space Radio was working on a show where they were going to be talking to white parents and their children about race. And Anne was very adamant that the content be handled with the care and the discretion that it deserved. And Anne reached out to our team because she'd heard that our young people had done some projects in and around race and race equity. And Anne really wanted to engage some youth voice, particularly youth voice with a critical lens around talking about race. And so Anne reached out and we began a partnership. and we worked with several cohorts of teenagers. We reviewed content and ideas for podcasts. We had great in-depth discussions around vulnerability and race and complexity. And it was just such a profound and enriching experience. And I'm really appreciative that we were able to participate. And when I think about Safe Space Radio and I think about the impact that it's had on me, I really think that it begins and ends with Anne. And you've been an amazing voice for this program. Your vision for this program is second to none. The idea of offering safe space for people to talk about complex issues, the idea of promoting an atmosphere where individuals could be vulnerable to discuss things that might otherwise be difficult to discuss. You are an amazing steward of this work. I appreciate you. And what I've been able to take from this experience is just really the importance of building those bridges. And as someone that without Safe Space Radio, I never would have met. But through this connection, we've grown, we've developed, we've shared great stories and great moments, and I'm certainly the better for it. And I want to salute you. I want to salute your team with this amazing run that you've had. And I hope nothing but the best for all those involved. And I'm so happy to hear that Safe Space Radio will live on and that there'll be an opportunity for generations after us to see and experience the work that you've put together, and to also have safe spaces to discuss things that are so necessary and so important for us to discuss and unpack and to learn from. So thank you, Anne. Thank you for the safe space work that you've done, and we appreciate and salute you.
I have been a big fan of Safe Space Radio from the beginning, and there isn't an episode that hasn't left me feeling more connected, more compassionate, and with a deeper understanding of a bigger issue. I love the guests, I love the stories, I love the courage, and I love the way the silence is broken again and again. Anne's goal to heal shame and stigma is ambitious, and she chips away at that in every episode. I've learned from Safe Space Radio that courageous conversation and compassionate listening are the antidotes to shame. I'm a therapist, and I've often thought that the scale of healing with an individual is so small in the world. And what Anne has done incredibly with Safe Space Radio, and this is unique, is to take that private healing conversation and bring it to the public, to people who might never choose therapy. So the impact is enormous. The fact that this work continues to be available to the public is an incredibly meaningful contribution. Anne's fearlessness, her authenticity, and her compassion are at the heart of every episode. These courageous conversations are a resource that I will turn to forever. I am truly grateful.
Safe Space Radio is near and dear to my heart. I met Anne when I invited her to come to the prison, a program that I started back in 2000, a hospice program, and I trained the men to become hospice volunteers. I'm the executive director of the Maine Hospice Council. Just to clarify why you might be wondering why I was allowed to go into the prison, but they did. They trusted me enough to invite me to come in and to start this program, which I ran for 18 years. I got a call from a psychiatrist by the name of Dr. Anne Hallward one day, and she wanted to interview some of the men in my class for her program, Safe Space Radio. And I said, well, there's just one caveat. I'd like to have you come into class, spend some time with us, get to know the men, and then I'd like to have you choose who you'd like to interview. I think she was pretty struck by the conversation that took place at the prison and wound up choosing a gentleman by the name of Bobby Pesa, and did 2 programs on him for Safe Space Radio. I think Bobby taught us a lot. I think Anne would agree. And just like all of the guests on Safe Space Radio. So it gave a voice to people who had no voice. And for that, I'm forever grateful.
I have known Dr. Anne since she was a student at Harvard Medical School way back when. She and a fellow student on their own initiative developed a course called Living with Life-Threatening Illness, indeed the roots of Safe Space Radio. And I had the privilege of being invited to be part of its faculty. Fast forward, I was Dr. Anne's 3rd guest in the newly created Safe Space Radio. And I was stunned by her graceful and insightful attention to her listener. And I just re-listened to it a few moments ago to freshen up my impressions. And she created an opportunity for mutual enlightenment for the interviewee, for the interviewer, Dr. Anne, and for the listener out there. Just look at what has blossomed forth over the past 15 years of its growth. Truly, in a safe space, Dr. Anne has brought forth wisdom from all points of the compass, from many cultures, from many life experiences, from a young teenager concerned with climate change to a former governor concerned about domestic violence. Rich conversations that have buoyed up those struggling with personal issues that have encumbered their individual lives. And by the way, Dr. Anne models what is so necessary in this era, civil discourse.
Hi, this is me, Nabila Afroz from Bangladesh, working as a psychologist in Asian University for Women. And as a human being or as a mental health practitioner, I always believe in peace and happiness. And trust me, I found Safe Space Radio a very peaceful place where I can get all other things, and also the voices. It's amazing, trust me. My listening journey started with asking for help, and I found it so powerful, so beautiful. And whenever I found it so helpful, I start sharing with my students via flyer every Tuesday with a podcast link. And now they already search their interested topics, and they say that it's so amazing. We can hear it, we can go through it whenever or whatever work we are doing. And via these things, the motto of Safe Space Radio, I believe that is so grateful. My immense gratitude towards whole Safe Space team and take a bow from Bangladesh. Thank you.
What Anne and all you've done is truly remarkable. Whether individually as a psychiatrist or through what you've all done together with Safe Space Radio, she and you have enabled healing and conversations and the ongoing of education of clinicians and patients themselves. It's an honor for HMS to get to host this collection and steward it in perpetuity.
So on behalf of Harvard Medical School, I just want to thank you for all you've done. I want to thank the board for really allowing us to be the stewards of this great resource. And we will protect it, we will honor it, and we hope that it will continue to be a source of great strength. It also fits with one of our great goals at Harvard Medical School. We recognize that the burden of mental health and the burden of the challenges that we all at different times in our life face and our family members face, it is rising to crisis proportions in our students, in our faculty, The burnout across our community is enormous. And our concern is it will only get worse unless we can tap into the kinds of resources that we now have. So I want to thank you so much. And thank you for trusting us with this resource.